always roll with advantage against the fleshbender.
So
Right?
if you're infected, you actually have advantage. So it almost pays for the PCs to be carriers in a mechanical sense.
It does, but not in the way you think. And that's that's the flirting part of it, right? Why would you end up going in with it in the first place unless all of a sudden think on the reason why is there a Cthulhu cult, right? If you knew what Cthulhu is, it would make no sense until you understand the grander mythos. Right? Then all of a sudden, yeah, Cthulhu doesn't seem so bad compared to the rest of what's out there.
Yeah. By the way, pardon me for being rude and eating, but because I spent all my time rooting around my basement, I didn't actually get to consume. So.
It's quite all right. You do that. I'll take a swig.
Do you want me to go to the third part now, by the way?
Yeah, if you want to end up doing that, I mean, it's your stream.
Sure. Let's, so we've gone over, hey, come back here. There we go. We've gone over, the House of Secrets arc. That was level 1 through 3. Into the Depths Below, 4 through 6. And now we're going to finish out the campaign at level 9, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And then, do you want to read the title of this one?
I will zoom in, and I will also turn off my cam so I can eat without being really awkward in front of you all. And that'll let you easier narrate while my big fat head doesn't block everything. Alright, so here we go. Let's zoom in a little bit.
Yeah. What does everybody want?
Up. Here we go. The Lurking Legacy. So we are in now the final arc of the Campagna.
Yeah. This one is titled 1. The party approaches the sleeping lord in his lair, ancient beyond measure, and awakened by the falling of an angel now entrapped in the ancient tree. Here their final tests arrive. The sacrifices to push forward will be made so that they can come to realize the promise of Kuraktar's mad service to make his people one. This our first part of this arc is aptly named Stygian. Okay, armed with the cursed blessing of Lolth, and she's probably one of the few who could actually end up making that sentence make sense. Liv joins the party, so this is one of the first times she has actively become a party member. She has come to see what this has done to Tinker Tailor. She has come to see the corruption. She cannot let this stand, and if indeed the party is to be the spearhead, she is their reprieve. Okay? Now keep in mind, she's a paladin. Good chance she has cured disease. She has been there as a mechanical boon, because down this last arc, whereas beforehand, we ended up having the autonomous estate, mistake, there we go. We had Salvation's End. Remember what I was telling you, in a horror campaign, in a regular campaign, you get more and more options, more power and all this kind of stuff, right? In a horror campaign, the more you go, the more into the depths, the more claustrophobic it becomes, the less your options appear, the more focused it becomes, the more the world seems to be coming down upon you. So that's the theme when we end up having this point. The corruption stems from the waters below the drow city of Allotek, and there it is, way into the depths. The paths have several infected, stitching themselves to walls and to one another. Deeper down, their flesh seems to meld, becoming walls of flesh near the water's edge. Once they have reached the waters, the walls reach out, attempting to add them to their collective. Eventually, the servants begin to converge upon them, where Liv gives her life in sacrifice to the bar the way to buy the party time. This is one of those points where I got to end up going over this again. But we have this arc. Liv is going to end up being in there, trying to end up helping the party in every way she can, right? But ultimately, you remember, when we first met her, she came as this very powerful individual. She is the light in all of this horribleness that's going on. She's never had reluctant to crack a smile or make a bad joke, trying to end up elevating the mood. She thrives on it. She's a gnome. It's certainly inherent nature. She's the best of them. And yet, she believes in the party and seeing what they've done and hearing tales of their exploits from their friends and their enemies, being in the Iktar state or the Drow of Salvation's End. She believes in the party, and she'll end up giving up what she has just to make them have a shot. Now, I want you to imagine this, right? As you end up going deeper into the depths, you're finding more and more people, a lot of them old, a lot of them gray, people being reduced to breeding pits, to make more people, like just born to be disease carriers, and then to ultimately find their fate here. And they want to be one with one another, so they begin to take thread and needle and starting to stitch themselves to one another to become part of this grand mosaic and let the disease do what it does. This is the type of realm you're starting to encounter. Something so depraved that if were you to tell of it, no one would believe you. You start to...
If I may also point out real quick, and
Go ahead.
just as Eltrion, Eltrion saw a connection with the NPC, the NPC's name being Herald as a herald. If we take a step back and we now see Liv sun-kissed, think of how literal and metaphorical her fall has been. How deep has she sunk? She's been consumed. I mean, we're saying all these like very pretty flowery words, but they're not pretty and flower. That you get what I'm saying? How far has she sunk? Because how far below the ground are we, right? She started off as someone who's lofty. Look at her name, sun-kissed, like the sun on high, bright, powerful. And now look to the depths at which she's sunk. And you want to talk about a milestone, in this case, a metaphorical one. At least that's a takeaway of mine. Eltrion may have had similar thoughts, or those of you out there in Chatland may have also seen, wow. So this NPC is a mile marker for, or really, she's like a depth reader, right? On a submarine or something. How far have we sunk? We had a golden standard, a sun-kissed standard, and now look at her.
Yeah. Which, once they arrive deep enough, they are now in the beast's lair. And they've lost the one person who was there from the beginning. Okay? Remember what I was telling you about, you make it personal. Mm-hmm. Lives that reminder of remember the Akta's state. Remember what's at stake. Mm-hmm. She's constantly pushing. She is that touchstone to remember the surface. And now even that has been consumed. Her sun has set, as Eltrion so beautifully put it. So now we have this. And unfortunately, well, at least unfortunate for the party, remember on how I told you foreshadowing was a big thing? Remember amongst the roots of the ancient tree, what was their decision, right? Because now it's very personal. Because as they end up continuing, as they might end up finding a reprieve, As they dig deeper, they will end up finding a single dying root. And in it is a dryad called Lowleaf. Lowleaf is a harbinger of knowledge and is trying to end up finding some way to live, but knows that this root has been severed. It is withering. It has only so much life left, and in doing so, Lowleaf only has so much life left. But this is where they start to find out what is happening. The Sleeping Lord is something that has been before creation. Something that is before gods. Something that it took the fall of an angel as a seed to suddenly end up awakening again. And since that fall, it has been plotting, it has developed, and it has wanted to ascend, to build itself up, and so it will become the master of all creation, because all creation will be one with it. A new vessel for an ancient spirit, an ancient thing. So they end up going with Lowleaf, who can't leave the root, but at the very least can try and end up helping them in some way, serving as a small reprieve or small respite. They're able to end up having a rest. This is their final rest. As they end up going through, they end up finding this entire underground chasm that is a testament to the Sleeping Lord, the Drowned One. They will find hundreds of names that this thing is called, but no true name. They end up finding that there are caverns made of stone that seems to have grown as roots. It holds back the rock and dirt that might fall upon, and instead creates into old syllables of time long forgot, carved into stone. You almost get the feeling that the stone itself watches you. Portions are flooded, very much on purpose. When you end up investigating it further, you find drains that purposely let in seawater from above. The realization that the city that the Drow have built has been built over a lake that has been purposely made. Delcorin, you've slain Lowleaf. Why? What was going through your mind when you decided to end up doing that? The last vestige of decency down here, and you have split it in twain like firewood. And for why? What does that make you? What does that make you in a land of monsters? Well, we're going to end up continuing when the party has had its last rest, last chance to breathe. They find perhaps a path that onlooks a grand corridor, and they see hundreds, maybe thousands of people. They're infected, twisted, looking very much the same. Some of them might be drow, some of them deep scions, some of them human, many of them gnome. And the unfortunate truth is that as they end up pushing forward, they find that their door that would allow them to get through this eldritch temple of impossible shape is guarded by a very, twisted but familiar face. Liv's not dead. She's infected. She is fallen. And you remember that strength she shone at the very first day at the funeral of Duke Kur. How such a lofty, happy being, someone whose smile brightened the room, whose very name was sun-kissed, and no more appropriate a name could be given to describe, is now this twisted, tendril, multi-eyed, fang-bearing creature whose twist of a neck opens a new maw coming out through the side, whose plates have been torn and ragged, and who drags her weapon along the ground, sparking against the stone. There's a clear look of intent in those mad eyes, as she clearly will not allow you to pass. This is why the chapter's called To Kill a Friend.
I mean, I had my mic on mute just to make sure I wasn't disturbing it, but whew. I mean, I don't know if any of you out there are, well, you wear that soapbox better than I do, brother. That was really good. That was really good.
This is when we'll take a quick respite here, actually, before we finalize this part of the arc.
Okay.
Notice what I was doing there? Like, as far as how I do that?
Your narration style? Or, I'm sorry, yeah. Am I answering for the prompt? Do you want chat to... Because I'll open it up. Chat...
Both!
You can answer him first here. Darkwolf says you're a spoopy.
No, Spoopy is a GM who runs a game for me. Okay. That's to make it, all right? But yeah, this is what I mean, right? You make the horror personal. And we did so by making it an NPC from level 1 to level 8. And it's at level 8. You have to put down the best thing that is down here who's been trying to help you.
Yeah. And in a meta sense, if we look at the mechanics, at level 8, you're getting that next either feat or that stat bump, meaning that you're all the more powerful and capable of doing it. You know, you've been growing throughout the campaign, even though we're going down, right? You've been growing, you've been getting stronger. And now it's time to surpass, you know, how the student has surpassed the master, so to speak. Yeah, that's, motion, for sure. Motion and, well, emotion are very important in a story.
Yeah. And this is one of the things I do differently than a lot of GMs. Right? I emphasize on story, but like, if you ask me on how, like, when I'm creating a plot or anything, Derek, where's your time go? My time goes into NPCs. Because the NPCs are your bridge to the PCs. And in doing so, like I said, you're not aiming for the PCs, you're aiming for the player.
Yeah. Yep, and that's the direct route. Because the PC... If your players, you know, if they're not just saying, hey, let's have a silly, fun adventure, which you can play D&D like that for sure, but presuming they want to get into an intense horror game, the PC is them. They put their thought into the PC, they put their skills, they put their mentality and emotions. They feel proud of their character. They want their character to succeed and look forward to the challenges that should come. And so they have translated a part of them onto paper and have handed it over, effectively. And so that is your way as a DM to get inside, because it should be a reflection of their pride, their skill, their hopes, their dreams, their intentions for a fun time. And not that horror isn't fun. It certainly is.
No, it can be. It's an acquired taste, most certainly.
Well, that's true. Maybe not everyone likes horror movies or haunted houses, but...
I'm going to narrate the last bit, and this is really important, because this is the...
Oh, I'm sorry. So do you want me to go down to level 9, or is this the last part for level 8?
This is going to be level 9. The gatekeeper is Liv. Once you've killed Liv, you're level 9. You have surpassed the master kind of situation.
Okay.
Here's the thing. By this point, you've been hearing voices from many individuals. But now you are in it. You are in the lair. Pardon. The gatekeeper has fallen. Your friend has fallen. As you end up going through, this is the final stretch. And you will meet the Sleeping Lord. The one who designed Fleshbender. The one who manipulated Jacob into the position. The one who corrupted his father to end up building. The one who ended up making Selcrest homeless in a fallen house. The one who corrupted your dear friend and had you put her to the sword. And by this point, you come to realize what it is. You might not know what the creature is, but 3 eyes from water depths come to find you. Servants abound. There are several of them. And you remember that there were thousands more coming. It knows you're here. It has brought its servants back to help defend itself. You are now on a race for time before you are overwhelmed with numberless twisted forms. You continue to end up pushing forward, and this aboleth, known as the Sleeping Lord, reveals itself as gnomes, humans, drow, and deep scions surround it, ready to defend their lord. However, it says that you have no choice. It's done. Its great works are revealed. And now the party's time to die has come. Of course, the party at this point, for the amount of loss that they've suffered, for the amount of sacrifices they have made, their friends, their beings never being able to go back to the surface, there is only one way, and that is through. So, they persist, and battle begins. The Sleeping Lord does battle as his minions start to pour out. Time is not on their side, as they end up continuing to end up doing all that they can to stop this aberration, as the temple itself seems to start to come down upon them. They finally slay the wretched creature. Infected, weary, worn, they breathe. And as they watch the Sleeping Lord sink to the bottom below, they can see it now. They end up turning to the next door, and they see, as they go through, a device. A simple pull of the switch. If they investigate, they'll end up finding that what this is how the reservoir is being filled. And then it looks over the ocean. You can look up and see that Drow city hanging high. Above it, the manor, Jacob, all the people you saved. Stopping the spread. But as you grab hold of the lever and pull it down, you can hear the pipes twisting, stopping the flow of water. And an amazing sight beholds. You watch as an ocean, an underground ocean, begins to drain so rapidly. And then the realization dawns. You can see it crawling, twisting, writhing, reaching up. A sea of flesh. A sea that is stretching up with no mind to guide it, save for one thought. Consume. Let all be one. Now, the question would naturally come down to, okay, but they beat the Aboleth. Shouldn't they win?
Yeah, there's like a pile of treasure waiting for him, isn't there?
This would be an introduction to Lovecraftian horror. If you know anything about Lovecraft, you don't win.
Nope.
At best, you survive.
Yep. I know I'm laughing because, I mean, look, at some points, if you don't laugh, you'll cry. But I'm personally familiar because I've gone through the Necronomicon and you know, the collected works and such. That's your prize. That's your dragon's hoard. You're alive. Congratulations.
And now, without a mind, this thing's just going to go right up to the surface and do what it does best.
Fortunately, though, our adventurers have 11 more levels left in them, right?
Maybe.
Right? If any of them have survived that long. No, I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek. By the way, that delivery was amazing. So I'm not trying to undermine that with, smiles and jovialness, or the very salient point you made that survival can itself be a reward. So if I came across as jarring to what you're trying to do, I apologize.
That is the lurking legacy. So, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think especially as the type of DM that I am, right? I joked around with Ivalos. I'm the loosey-goosey type of DM. I have ideas. I have direction, and I like the way that this is formatted because it allows for options. It allows for players. It's not a completely choose your own adventure, but it's also not a hard set of railroad tracks that are taking you on Disney's haunted house ride, right? You hop in the car and it just takes you through spooky rooms and there you go. This does allow for agency. It allows for the reflection of your personal thoughts and morals. It makes greater points, and it is very well done, especially with the weaving in of NPCs, which, as far as, King, there's typos, but don't worry about it. Forget about it. Something that I often have not done on the channel is get into the role of NPCs. Now, for not necessarily my own style, but for the format that I present on Twitch, I often I don't consider them because I keep it party focused. We generate 5 characters, and so I have on some meta constraints. And so what I really found refreshing for what we're doing here is NPCs are a part of the world. NPCs are living and breathing, hopefully in a more humanoid form than not, but even not humanoid, as a reflection of what's happening. And that NPCs are very important tools in the scope of a campaign. And I'm not just talking about whoever the big bad evil guy is. Because look, if we look at a Candor attitude, you know, we see the BBG, we encounter him several times, and he's a person. You can rationalize that. We never even saw the bad guy as such as it exists until the very end. We've heard things, we've imagined, we didn't really even piece it together. And then, you know, you have that final fight, and you're like, yes, all this rage at all of the bad things that have happened, and yet did we win? Now, in a meta sense too, hopefully this, you know, I'm sure your players will be left wanting more, especially because that was their reward, was survival. Well, what do? I don't know. Do you want to roll a new character and find out what happens next? Because these ones, depending on your choices, you might not ever get to see the sunlight again. Unless you somehow came up with a way to cure this disease without Lolth's blessing, or you could circumvent it, or something along those lines. These characters are alive, but how accessible are they? And so, as a DM, in a meta sense, would you want to open up the possibility for the characters to continue and pick up at level 10, or I don't know, you have a 3-level break, or however you'd want to do it, and go from there? Or is this the legacy that you use that word, Derek? Do you want to leave the legacy for, you know, the next generation of adventurers who have to deal with this? Or heck, the next campaign can pick up the very same day, you know, meanwhile, above ground, and and you know, elsewhere in Ukt, you know, these poor people, because this campaign, it was a full campaign. We have 9 levels here. Took place in a somewhat isolated, at least laterally. I think we went very deep, of course, but in the grand scheme of Ukt, everyone has been living their normal life this entire time. You know, people get up and they'll say, "Oh man, I stubbed my toe. My day really sucks because my foot hurts."
Having no idea what the hell's like thousands of feet below them.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
That's part of Eldritch horror, right? It's the horror nobody wants to face. No one would want to admit to this. Even if the party did somehow get to the top and warn people, even if they could find some way to prove it, who would listen? This is too batshit. Pardon my language. It's too out there. It's too much.
Yeah, look, the countries in Mesotopia are bickering amongst themselves. You know, each region, let alone the country, has a problem of some kind. And on top of that, there's this external threat of war from this invading empire. That's an in-your-face threat. You know, you hear that from the town criers every day. You know, Imperial ships seen, you know, crossing across the Aslandian deserts. Irresponsible high elves shirking their duty. No, I'm just kidding, King. Maybe not, but kind of.
No, they are. You know they are, because they're high elves.
Yeah, well, they're all hedonism bought, right? You know, if they could fuse themselves, it'd be to ambulating couches, and they just have grapes dropped in their mouth. You know, from Futurama. Yeah, but in the face of something, you're like, well, this is a real threat. We have this empire, you know. But meanwhile, below this one small, in the grand scheme of Mesotopia, let alone the entire world that we're developing, this is a seed of evil. Well, I want to be careful in how we're phrasing that. It is an external force that is less understood than an invading empire, and therefore is more scary. Is more. What do? We can prepare for a ground war or a naval war, because we've done that for how long? How many of us have fallen into the depths of the earth itself to face an aboleth?
Yeah. And the worst part is the aboleth isn't even the biggest threat in it. Just to realize that it is just the designer of something so much more grand. And I want to end up making it a point that Dark Wolf, I do understand that she may end up thinking that I am creepy, and I take that as a high compliment. If I can do that, if I can get you on an emotional level to kind of, right, as a GM, when I am narrating, have you have that guttural reaction, then I know I'm doing my job, because that is what makes a horror campaign. A horror campaign is, like you said, it's not, oh, look, I got 20 skeletons, let me just put them down on the board now. No. It's that bit where inside, and that's kind of where the high point is for the campaign. It's that twisting where it's like, oh my God, after all that, and we didn't change a goddamn thing. That feeling of hopelessness, of how trivial everything you've done, that's life and death, of pushing forward, of trying to, maybe if we beat this, things will get a little better. We've made so much difference. We managed to end up clearing out the infection. People will be able to feed themselves. We're here managing to drive this back. We are finding allies underneath. We're capable of actually building up. We are resisting and finding out through all of this time, stopping war from breaking up top, stopping this house, which is held up as an icon. It's a Harvey Dent style thing, right? Where they need to make him an icon based on a lie and maintain that lie. We have done all of this, and after all of this, it means absolutely nothing. The horror of your own insignificance is a very interesting point, and you brought up the hero's journey. The hero's journey is broken, and that's what makes it horrific in Lovecraftian horror, because you cannot go back to that familiar place. That familiar place no longer exists, because even if you went up and you can try and live a normal life, you cannot, because you know what the hell is down there, what is about to happen, and no one will listen. No one will do anything. You're living on borrowed time at best.
You are correct. In the hero's journey, oftentimes, like, you return changed, and in some ways you have. Though, can you ever participate in the very same world from which you came as this, I'm the bright-eyed adventurer, level 1, spunky teen who wants to go out and be someone and something. If we look at our character sheets, all right, let's look at, let's look at Bortharian. Because throughout the course of the campaign, we may not have picked on our players specifically. And Derek, I don't know if you when you went through the dungeon, if you kind of drew on points, and maybe that's what you'll get to. But look at Bortharian, okay? He is an entertainer. He is an actor. He's a singer. And for his costume, I chose opera clown because it's you project. You're colorful. You want to look at his personality. The world is in need of new ideas and bold action. He wants to be famous, whatever it takes. He knows a story relevant to anything. He loves a good insult. And you know what? Was he willing to leave everything on the battlefield, including himself? Yes. Will what he did down here make him famous? Will it? As a DM, did you give him exactly what he wanted? And now that he's holding it, he realizes, wow, this isn't what I wanted at all.
You might have noticed, right? Because the party's going to build names for themselves. The promise of, and you can play to that again, right? This is freeform enough that try and imagine the scene with him and Jacob, and Jacob saying, if you manage to end up doing this, if you can get to the root of this, but Tish, I will gladly fund you. I will sing high praises, and I will put my family name tied to you. Right? Because he is in that desperation. So he's willing to end up doing it, and then realizes, I'm going to be the famed man who just speeded up the end of this entire country and potentially the world. Is that what you wanted? because you got it.
Yep. You
And-
got it.
And here's the thing, right? If you've developed your NPCs, you will learn that particular NPCs are going to gravitate. You know, Nash can be a relatable character, right? Look,
Oh, yeah.
I gotta, you know, you can end up having Jans who really is doing this for the good of the public, right? Seeing this public or this menace that no one will bring down because it might be of position, you know, trying to figure out, like, do we send a hit? Do we send Nash after Jacob too? Is the kid any better than the son? Do the father's sins fall to the son?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have these characters to end doing. And this is, remember, if you end up building an NPC the same way with the same thought as a PC, much like what I was telling you, can use them to bounce and develop each other, right? NPCs aren't static either. They're going to develop just the same way. Now, before we end up going into the dungeon, I want to illustrate a few things. First of all, when it comes down to horror, delivery is key. If I were to end up telling you, yeah, you see about 30 bones laying around, they look human. There's something in the dark, it scuttles, and oh yeah, there's something dripping from the ceiling. You don't know what it is, but you know, it looks black and sticky and stinks a little. It doesn't really invoke anything, right? That's more whimsical.
It's a start, but you know, you might
Right.
go like, oh, gross, like black slime and bones, because that's the automatic response, right? I shouldn't like that because it's gross and bones are bad.
Yeah. But if I start invoking stuff like the sense of smell and taste, and what you're hearing and feeling, right? Another thing, this is something you can always play on, right? There are some general reactions you can have or you can state, right? I can say this smell makes you sick to your stomach. How you choose to react on that little jump is what defines your character. Not the fact that he might get sick from this, but on the fact that this is so horrible, this is going to be a shared response, but how you act on it is going to say loads about your character. And sometimes you can take a little bit of character agency away, and it's not a bad thing. So a simple example is the discussion of trying to stay quiet, and you hear it. That heartbeat, your heartbeat, as it ends up building in your chest, you try and slow your breathing, hoping that it won't find you. It won't find you, but you know you're alive as long as you can still hear your heartbeat. You build that intensity. You describe what they feel, what they hear. You know, I don't need to use visuals to describe something. And the more you start doing it, olfactory is probably one of the strongest because it immediately ties to an emotional response. A perfect example, those of you who, many of you might find this, and this goes back to anchors. I want you to think very clearly about salt and vinegar chips. I don't care what you feel about them, but I want you to think about them. And if you suddenly got that little bit of a sour taste just under your jawline just now because you were thinking about it, that's what I'm talking about when I say anchors.
That, by the way, that did happen to me, especially because salt and vinegar chips, bleh, I don't like them because they are sour. They do have that. I mean, sour and salt. Who would eat sour and salt? And so when you were talking about, oh, apparently Dark Wolf does.
Yep.
But when you're talking about that, now fortunately I had some pizza that I've been eating off camera here, so I was able to hold off the true horror of salt and vinegar chips. But I'll tell you, you said that, and I kind of had that initial, like that pucker, like ugh.
Yeah, but that's what I mean, right? And that's what horror can do. If I start to describe when a particular monster that you're trying to avoid, and you every time it's around, you smell the spice of vanilla, right? You might not see it, you might not hear it, but just the knowing it's around is enough to make you go, it's here. It's here somewhere. That panic starts to set in, right? Those emotional ties I am building to a character. From this point on, if I say live sun-kissed, there's going to be a part of you that goes, oh yeah. You've never even played in this game, and you probably already have that emotional response.
Yeah.
That's not happenstance. I have put that to you. And this is the power of a GM who can play with your emotional well-being, is you are trying to end up invoking these emotions. And one of the best ways you can do that is through powerful portrayals of NPCs. And it's an underutilized, underappreciated tactic to help draw a player in. It is not about the NPCs. It's the PCs that are telling the story.
Yes.
But the story is only as good as its supporting cast. And its supporting cast is what helps bounce who these PCs are. What are they about? What do they value? How do you build this up? And if you can figure out what your players are actually gravitating to, who are they like? Who do they like? Who do they keep going about? Do they start mimicking one of the NPCs? Does one of the PCs trying to or end up finding one of the NPCs trying to mimic? Because Jacob's a perfect example of that. He'd probably end up mimicking a few, because when you see him doing like this hissing motion, much like a blue dragonborn might, in points of get away from me or shut up, and he's trying to emulate that because he views him as a symbol of power, a knight, that's endearing.
And something else, while I wasn't able to find the thing that I wanted from my basement, I found a couple other aspects, props that can possibly represent the themes that were presented. I don't know if any of you are familiar with what this is. Does this look familiar to any of you?
Ha 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 ha. Yep.
Are you willing to take the plunge? Are you willing to,
In the words of Barney Gumble, just tuck it to my veins!
Are you willing to take the plunge? I'm offering you a temptation. I'm offering you some wonderful, I'm offering you something wonderful. Can you beat the game without it? Well, probably.
Mm-hmm.
But do you want it? Oh, look at this. It glows, it's yummy. Wonderful delivery method.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Very practical.
Yeah.
Unless you actually ended up understanding the theory of how stim packs work and realized that it's more likely to blow your arm off when you use it. But it's fascinating. I do that with the scent of honey and cinnamon. If you smell either strongly in a place where the scent makes no sense, then a powerful supernatural entity, one alignment or the other, has taken interest in you. Yes, Genesis, that is a perfect example, right? You're using something like that to hint, right? And again, if we go over this guide again, you're going to start realizing there's some things that are hinted at, and you can realize that there's lots of opportunities to take stuff from later chapters and start to hint at it earlier. The library, Nash, Jacob, potentially his father's diary or study, Liv, Jan's. There are opportunities to use these to anchor it further, right? How much more powerful would it be to have that emotional attachment to Jan's before finding out what she did? What happens if one of your friends from the tavern of the night drinking, you had the typical, bar fight with them, and eventually you just drank the pain away, and you woke up with a hangover and laughter the next day, and then you find out this person has been one of the people who put in a couple of copper into the pot to help pay for Nash. You can play with these ideas, and because of the way this is structured, it's free form. It's enough that what's the element that I can use to drag that player character in deeper, build that emotional connection higher, so that the payoff, whether for good or ill, often ill, because you want, as a horror GM, what you're trying to do is twist the knife like, oh my God, what have we done? Or, oh no, please don't let it be him. Or, oh God, I can't let this go. You want that reaction. That's one of the things about me as a GM is I thrive on player reaction.
Oh yes. Because as a DM, you're the force, or you're the equal, or every action has an equal and opposite reaction. You're a force of nature, you know, and you can't exist without, you can't be the counterforce unless you have the force. And you know, when we were talking about drow and whatnot, I'll show off one other fun little prop here. I have a half dozen eggs, by the way. Does this little symbol here trigger anything interesting?
Beautiful.
Look, they're wholesome, they're organic, they're cage-free eggs, and we even have a nice little nutrition label over here too. And sometimes, you know, as a DM, you want to give a very wonderful gift to your players. Look how wonderful, and you know what? If you open it up on the inside, if you open it up on the inside, you get a fun little friend. And by the way, if you wonder why the drow knock their victims out, it's not necessarily, well, it's not necessarily for this. But
are you kidding? Using slaves as incubation chambers for spider eggs? Oh yeah, have a player live through that.
Well, it's not necessarily for that, can happen too, but there's also you're just plain up, you know, sacrifice to Lolth or whatever. But you definitely fall, like, that's why aliens, look, they do what they do not because they're you know, not because they're evil. It's you want to talk about nature, you know, the nature of something. They don't even try and kill you. They actually want you alive because they're beings of life. They're beings of reproduction. They're beings of you know, of terraforming and adaptation. So, but anyway, you reminded me of that, and this is a very, you know, Alien is a series that does mean a lot to me. So that's why I wanted to bring out these props as kind of a fun way of if you know your players like BioShock, if you know your players like Alien, I would say don't be afraid to make some metaphors to your players, because that's another inroad. You know the things they watch and the things they like, and so you can flavor, right? So we have all this content up over here. Change a couple descriptions if you're getting the point across, but you want to deliver it home. It's a way that you can adjust, and that's with any module, right? Curse of Strahd, I run Curse of Strahd at the store, and I'm doing it as a, like, no worse than PG-13. But as I tell my players, and Dark Wolf can back me up on this, I can run it a lot more scary, I can run it more visceral, and there's things that, you know, that I'm not omitting, but, you know, it's more of a fun, by the way, there's a more of a fun or fancy-free, you know, approach to it. So, but Derek, you're running Curse of Strahd, and from what I've seen of Mr. Plunderloot's diary, his player diary, you're hitting the, you know, your Barovia is an even darker place, a more visceral place.
Well, I will say this. Would you like a pastry?
Yeah. Oh my. Real quick then, do you want me to go over to the dungeon since we're kind of like in a gear switching mood right now?
Yeah, sure. But anything else you wanted to comment on, or like overall as far as this arc, what are your thoughts?
I am personally, I'm personally happy with the arc. I think you've done an amazing job. And for anyone out there who's just watching this, I kind of waylaid Derek with this notion because look, as we have weeks of content creation, and this is a back and forth communication Twitch channel. You know, last Saturday there were some differences brought up between how I run campaigns and others, and that's perfectly fine. I'm not saying that in a begrudging manner. And so I stopped and I thought, and I said, you know what? I would like to do what I do in my store. If they want to step up and they want to be a part of something, I like empowering them as judges, as, you know, tournament organizers. Derek has been with the channel for, I mean, I haven't been around for years and years, but he was an early adopter, in my opinion. And so I wanted to invite him on because this is his bread and butter, you know, and I know you said it's okay to pigeonhole you. I'm not trying to, but you're very good at this, and I think tonight's broadcast shows that if you're strong in something, you know, as a DM, you don't have to be good at everything. You may not be a good horror runner, and that's perfectly fine, because maybe you are the best, like lighthearted comedy DM that you know. And you will find players, because a lot of players might want to take a break from, you know, killing goblins, you know, going into dungeons, and they want something more comedic. A lot of people would want to sample Derek's wares because he's super good at this. Not that he can't run other types, but if you have a specialty, specialize in it. Don't be afraid of it, and look at the fruit that it bore. You know, could I have given you a presentation like this? I don't think I could have. You know, I'm not mentally, you know, it's not that I couldn't conceptualize it. I did, I followed along. But would I have thought the same way? Oh, heck no. And that's fine, because that shows the diversity of thought that's out there, and the fact that even my way that I go on about character creation and all other aspects of what we do in the channel, it's not the only way. I want to encourage you, and I know Derek is on board with this too, otherwise he wouldn't be presenting. We want you to think. We want you to challenge yourselves. You know, go beyond what you may even be comfortable doing. You know, explore new territory. And in this case, look, this is quote unquote my channel. This is my stream. This is whatever. But here we have a guest DM who has stepped up and has done an amazing job. And Derek, I don't know if you talked to Ivalon about this. But I believe our final portion of Mesotopia in this campaign setting will be finished up with Ivalon as the DM and going about things in a different way. Because especially last Saturday, as we were discussing, Ivalon's approach to being a DM in storytelling is very different from my own. And, and I don't know if Bobicus is in here, but Bobicus has a different approach as well, as he's been making commentary about the game that he runs and the game that he plays in. And you know what? I bet when Plunderloot runs his vampire game, it may be similar to yours, but he's going to leave his own thumbprint on it. And, you know, for King, King plays a lot of stuff on Roll20 from what I'm understanding. And I bet King writes characters differently and presents way differently as well. And that's the beauty of this game, and imagination and storytelling.
Well, I will end up saying, I'll give this. Bobicus is very much the yin to my yang, because, you know, we come at these things so almost diametrically opposed. Now, for me, I'm not going to lie, I am very much a judgmental person. It's a case of proofs in the pudding. Right? Because I've seen a lot of people who are GMs, but there's particular skill sets that are very much lacking. I just see it bouncing across the screen right there.
Yeah,
but
I was going back to my original place on the side here.
Yeah. But a simple example, right? Ive, you're going to end up finding, has a almost point of fact narration, right? That's his style. Me, I end up tending to speak with a fair amount of emotion. I like to play with tone. I like to end up grabbing your attention, and basically I like to grab players by the throat and not let them go for a better half of 6 hours. You know, they might say I'm fixated on asphyxiation in that regard, but there's something you can end up bringing in that regard. But something that Bobicus ends up doing here really well, I'm probably terrible at, especially when it comes down to, like, he's very much a, what are the mechanics naturally telling me? Because the Lurking Legacy is almost in complete opposition to everything that is inherent in D&D. In D&D, right, you get more power, you get to save the world, you get more loot, you get more renown, you are heroes of the realm. Everybody, by the end, everybody hero worships you.
Why didn't you have treasure parcels in here? Come on now.
Yeah. Whereas me, you know, I kind of want to slip the knife in and twist and, you know, make it a 5-hour bleed out session, because that's who I am and that's what I do. But to the players who like this kind of game, and you're probably going to ask yourself, who likes this kind of game outside of Plunder, who's an advocate of this, and a good one at that, you're going to end up finding that the people who like this game are the ones who are looking to feel something bluntly, you know, and...
I think Venom, because when he came aboard, he said, we play the episodic, kind of the fun, lighthearted D&D, kick in the door, kill the monster, get the treasure. And he was looking for something like what you want to present. I don't know if Venom's in here, and I don't think Bobicus is.
No, but I'm still going to shout them both out.
Oh, yeah, of course. Because I think we're both approaching Venom's willingness to be open, and Bobicus is... he's played devil's advocate. You know, I can be very intense on my soapbox, too. And Bobicus steps up and he says, I don't believe that that's the case. I interpret it this other way. And I take that as a compliment, because people have that. But I think what we've highlighted too is it is important as a play group. Now we're not talking as in character. You know, we're having a meta conversation. You as a DM have the meta conversation with your players, and you say, "This is what I'm going to present to you. Are you okay playing it?" And not just, you know, horror elements, or you're reading like the back of an anime. You know, there's like language, you know, brief nudity and something else. You're like, I'm presenting horror, you know, and the game will probably be, and you could give an estimate. You could say 30% combat, 70% roleplay, something like that. You know, make sure your players are on board, because if I just want to kick in doors and kill monsters, you can be the best horror DM ever, but I'm not going to have fun at your game because I'm not doing the thing that I wanted. So having that communication beforehand is very important, because then when you get those players that savor, that salivate over the challenge, that they want to have their feelings stirred up inside, you will have these epic sessions. And maybe some of these sessions in this campaign you talked about, you never roll a die. It's all role play. And it's role played so well that you don't need the arbitrary decision of a die in order to have success or failure. And that's D&D just as much as you know, random dungeon generation and killing orcs and taking their treasure.
Yeah, and here's the thing, right? Fundamentally, okay, so just as a side note, I am very particular with who I run games for, okay? And it's not always the guy who's at the top of the food chain, you know, amazing role player. I try, but there's a term in Vampire the Masquerade or in a LARP called bleed. And what that is when your emotional state is emulating that of your character, right? And I thrive with players that can do that, or can present something that can let me create that, right? Now, so a good example, I'll do two polar opposites in my play group, both of who should be in the channel right now. Plunder can be at times, at his best, like that 10 out of 10 I've seen the best out of Plunder, an emotional powerhouse. He will make you feel for what the hell his character's going through, and he's going to take you along that ride. It's a case of, if I'm putting my neck in this noose, you're coming with me, right? Ive is on the complete opposite spectrum of that. He presents with a very cold matter of fact, and he tries to end up bringing those elements in, but what he does do is very well bring up a situation that can bring that out of all the NPCs. And the best example, without getting into the details, is Sit Doggy.
Oh
internal.
I've seen him mention that in chat before. I'm fairly certain.
Yeah, because anybody who was listening to those sessions felt really, really bad for his ghoul. Like, wow, what are you doing? Right? But that built something that everybody else in the group was invested in this NPC because of Ive, right? So that's the two quintessential opposites. So they're both bringing something I want in my table. But the person's coming here and expecting, like, oh, I want a horror theme because that sounds hardcore, but won't show any want of emotional investment, is waiting to kick in the door, right? Well, there's a good chance that person wasn't going to get invited in the first place.
I want to stake a vampire. I want to beat up a skeleton. That can be a form of horror, but it's not. It itself is only a corner of it. It's not the concept.
That's not horror. That's Halloween.
Okay, yeah, that's a good summary as well.
And I'm particularly picky when it comes down to horror, just because this is the craft. DMing is a craft, and you have to learn a little bit of acting, a little bit of writing, a little bit of improv. You need to end up learning some bits of psychology. You need to learn these things, and depending on what mix you have, right, will dictate what kind of GM you have. Myself, because I'm a specialist in this is the lens of which I view everything I do, right? So I don't mind the pigeonhole because as one of the best GMs/STs I have ever had the pleasure of running with, once told me, who cares if you're one note if it's one hell of a note?
Yeah. And Eltrion Pryor said if I were to ever become a DM, I would probably specialize in epic quests. Pursue that. I responded to you the same way, Eltrion. If you love that epic tier, it's high risk, high reward. It's the fate of the world hinges on, those are the stakes that you want to play with. If that's the playground that you're in, if those are the toys that you want to have on your table, specialize in it and don't be shy about it. Say, yeah, I'm the epic level guy. That's where I find my interest. Some people just want that. Some people want the, I love low level, right? Because we're all sweet and innocent, and the combat could be more deadly, but everything is kind of low key and more real because people don't have level 9 powers, and that's fine too. If you love, if your sweet spot is level 1 to 8 or 1 to 6 or whatever, hit it hard. Be the best dang low level or epic level or horror or sci-fi in D&D or Shadowrun or anything else that's out there. Eclipse Phase, oh my gosh, I've played Eclipse Phase. That's a cool game too. But if you like it, hit it hard and be the best you can at it, and don't be afraid of people saying, wow, I was really hoping for a horror game, and maybe you want to challenge yourself and incorporate it, but have that be a strength. Don't feel like, oh well, I'm just known as the sci-fi guy. That's great. Yeah. You have a reputation and you have a firm base from which you can adapt other things, and you can always go back. Anchoring. Hey, well, let's use vocab words, just not in the same horror sense.
No, it's all good. And you're right.
Before we get too much further along in time,
okay,
because we'll have time to chat, but I did want to at least go through the dungeon you made real quick.
All right.
Well,
so
we don't have to do it in 5 minutes, but I do want to get to it.
Okay.
I have it brought up here. Where is this taking place? Oh, yeah, is this on the final approach?
This is starting to get to that final approach, right? Okay. This would be trying to enter in a little bit further. Now, this is just something I threw up on the fly, just using the context of the situation. It's not complete. I haven't managed to finish page 2 of the descriptions, but what I have here is enough to work. Okay, so you got your basic entrance, right? Now, what you want to imagine here is as you go lower, right, as we get almost to water level, you start walking along these paths that are just on the outer ledge. You might have a few level deep scions with rogue levels or something like that popping out. You might end up having, a whole bunch of different things. This is where you end up running into things that are infected. And this is one of the best parts about Fleshbender, is that fundamentally it changes how you approach these creatures. Because if you're a melee person, you need to think, okay, if I don't have the world's best con save, despite the fact I'm entirely dependent on armor, I need to figure out some stuff. And hey, this is a weakness. How do I overcome it? Well, I just ended up talking to Selcrest, and, she ended up saying, well, there's a chance that you might be able to end up doing this. This was an old legend. Congratulations, you just added a new element to the plot. Right? Well, why haven't you got it? Well, have you seen what I got stuck with left? Why the hell would I stick my people's neck out? You grab it for me and we'll talk. All right? You can have these discussions. Anyway, so you end up coming across this bit just on the shores of this sea, unbeknownst to what's actually below, right? And you go through and you start to hear a scream. Like, what the hell's going on? You see tracks, you see footprints, maybe some splashed water from the shore leading in. And what you have here is what's called the Maw. That title will become very present in a moment. But as you end up going in, you're going to end up going into this hall, and it seems to be just a split in the earth, like the tunnels have collapsed and what have you. What is actually here is an old prison from back when the Sleeping Lord actually did have rulership. This was a part of his, for lack of a better term, castle. This is a part of his region, and it was a prison. You end up having the chance to end up making your first decision. The first decision, if you end up taking a look where the one is, at one, you're going to start seeing these horrible caverns, but if you end up taking a look at number 2, you're going to end up having this bit where, there's this pillar room, and maybe inside you're going to see these carvings on the wall, right? I'm just going to read this loud, actually, just to put myself in the mindset.
Yeah, no problem. Get into the groove, man.
The stone gives an opening to this chamber. Bits of rubble on the ground has scattered far, revealing pillars of impossible shapes that may grow as stone vines in a nearly hypnotic pattern. Just past those stone pillars, a gnome and a human look down the next hall, where upon the floor is a rancid mess of moving flesh, with legs of some unfortunate humanoid being pulled in, becoming one with the amorphous mass that peeks around the corner. Now, this is when you're like at your level 7, right? So this is a trivial encounter, normally, because this is just 2 commoners. Except both those commoners are carriers. Now, if we flip over to the table, this is one of the things that makes it interesting, is you can take these little low-level encounters, and you can start tailoring it to how many times do you want to roll that Constitution save? Because carrier, they regenerate 2 HP around, which is nothing since they're a commoner compared to a 7th level adventurer. But every time they're injured by a slashing or piercing damage, they infect everything in a 10-foot radius. The spores literally burst out of their body. So what starts to happen is despite the fact that these guys are effectively a diseased water balloon with consciousness. If you're not learning how to handle them, right, either at range or maybe burning them or finding something using bludgeoning weapons to not split them open, this is something you need to learn. And your first few encounters, you're probably not going to learn this. But once you start working around it and you start... Wait. Why was it that the monk didn't have to roll once he ended up hitting it?
Yes, encouraging battlefield awareness is a very good thing as a DM. I'm sorry to interject here, but you touched on a very good point. You don't always have to point it out to your players. Make them set that as part of the meta conversation. I'm going to illustrate, or hang on, how do I want to say this? I'm going to tell you what everyone sees regardless of your lowest passive perception. It is up to you to interact with the environment or ask specific questions and think beyond what the very plain in front of your face scenario is I'm giving you.
Yep.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, it's quite all right. Here's the thing. Remember I told you, Fleshbender, and you touched on this actually earlier on in the conversation, Fleshbender has its benefits. And that should terrify you, because now it's the temptation. Right? It unto itself can become the temptation. Try and imagine you're human, let's say human for instance, right? Let's take a stereotypical human fighter, right? Just stereotypical human fighter. We rolled a whole new party and we're going through this. In this situation, he doesn't have dark vision. He's dependent on another light source. But he gets infected and he gets devourer. His face literally turns into a maw of a lamprey eel. He can no longer speak or see, unless he's under the effect of horrible eyes, but instead can feel things around him so long as his bare skin touches solid ground. Then he has tremor sense of up to 30 feet.
Which is arguably better than even dark vision, because if something goes invisible, or you can effectively see through illusions also. Well, yeah. Some anyway. Like, some might actually produce tremors.
Yep. But because of that, right, well, I'm more effective by this, and there is a chance for me to sprout eyes. So if I got horrible eyes, I now got tremor sense and this, and a bite attack. What's the problem? How far do you want to push it? How far do you really want to push it?
Yep.
And you can have up to 3 of these, but if you ever have to make another save, and something I would have to clarify is, every time you get hit, you're rolling another save. You might already be infective, but now it's just advancing the disease.
Looks like King is he wants to be patient 0 for you, Derek.
Yep, King wants to be patient 0.
He wants to be injected full of Eve here.
Yeah, probably. And that's a very apt way to describe it. And this is what starts to happen, right? And again, what we base this entire thing off of? Gibbering Mouther. So you start to take on traits of a Gibbering Mouther. Right? Using the table 2d6. The reason being is 7's the most frequent thing to land on, including 5, 6, and 8 and 9. So just with those 3, the one big one you really don't want to end up having at first is Maddening Mind. Now, on a story level perspective, guess what? You can end up having this, and you start hearing whispers. And on occasion, you can actually hear the sleeping Lord. You have a direct connection to his orders. Do you want to give up that inside information?
Yeah, that's quite the hot potato to hold on to.
Right. So again, the temptation, but we're going into body horror, which is also one of my favorites, right? So we got this body horror bit. Now try and imagine you're infected and you want to go back to the surface to warn people? All right. What do you think happens if you actually rolled double 6s and got carrier? Oh, I'm about to end up regenerating 2 HP around. Hey, that stacks up really freaking quick. And if I'm spending most of my time exploring and less time in combat, that's great. But guess what? Every time I'm injured, I'm infecting everybody, including my own party. How far will this start to scale? How much more careful do you have to be and realize that the encounter chart with this suddenly means those low CR monsters, that it's like this wouldn't be a challenge, so why am I throwing in? Suddenly is something you got to be very wary about. There's only so many times you're going to make that con save.
Yep. Yep, makes you pick and choose your battles pretty well too, or
yeah,
it's...
And it builds tension, which is what I'm all about. So we're going to go back. If you have anything to interject, please do. But
I will. And of course, chat is still welcome to throw out any questions or comments that they have.
Yeah. Yeah, King is all on this.
Yeah, King says we're going full infection mode today. In fact, King's going to be that parent, you get the one kid with chicken pox. Like the older brother gets chicken pox.
Send him to school.
And so, yeah, either, well, you do that or you tell the little sister that she has to lick the same spoon that her brother had in her mouth so she contracts it just to get it done and over with. So King here will get it, and he'll lick the spoon and give it to everyone in the party and say, lick this spoon or else.
Yeah. No, I imagine King would be, hey man, high five, because of
right.
And you'll appreciate the title of this one. My flesh to your flesh.
Oh yeah, that's true. Real quick, hey Fanog, why am I so quiet? Well, we are doing a special broadcast. I'm riding shotgun, and your host for tonight is here. I'll write his name out. Is MacabreDerek, and he is giving us some content that he has whipped up over the course of the week. So in this case, hey, I'm a chatter just like you. I might as well be in the chat room because I'm along.
I'm hijacking.
Yeah, he's if you've seen Super Troopers, he's the one who ran into the police car and said, "You boys like Mexico?"
You boys like horror?
and we're just here going like the snozberries taste like snozberries.
All right.
But yeah, that's the gist of what we're going for, Fanog. So buckle up. It's been a great ride, and he's taken on a bit of a horror dungeon as we're finishing up this segment.
So again, we're going over this disease, fleshbender, right? And if you understand like how this works, suddenly like all those little things, like it's effectively a viral water balloon. That's what a person is to you if they're infected. And Fanog, great to see you here again, man. I appreciate it. Hats off to Maddie who orchestrated this. So hey, sweet. Anyway, we got these two infected commoners. This shouldn't be a challenge, right? Here's the challenge, and this is a very short dungeon, right? Because I like a lot of RP, and I like my dungeons quick and to the point. So what we have here is these two commoners. Now, if they look at the party, remember, Fleshbender is as much of a boon as it is a plague. If they see the party and the party's infected, they're just going to move out of the way and let the party do what the party does. They will not acknowledge their presence. Because as far as they're concerned, you're either fully affected and are coming to terms with it, or you're partially infected and coming to terms with it, or you're fully infected and, well, welcome to the mall.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like the Borg, from Star Trek.
Yeah, that's kind of the psychology in that regard.
Or a little bit more internal in Alien 3. There was a reason why Sigourney Weaver's character Ripley was passed up having her brain eaten by the alien when she was cornered.
Yep. But here's the thing. If one of the party isn't or can't hide that fact, one of these guys is coming after the party, the other one is running full tilt. Now, if they do not kill this guy before he gets out of line of sight, it's going to be very, very tricky. Because what he's going to do is he's going to run all the way to 9. 9's where your final encounter is. There's a particular, shall I say, homebrew-style race that I really want to end up trying out at some point, called an embodied mouther. Think a gibbering mouther if it could keep humanoid shape. Now, this thing is a conjurer. So right now, the effective ECL of this dungeon is probably a 3. However, he's a conjurer, and he now has heads up, which means he starts summoning. By the time you get there, that CR counter might jump up to 12, depending on how long you take. Welcome to your race against time. Now, you might notice that some of the floor is discolored. The reason being is that entire thing, remember how we earlier discussed the idea of people stitching themselves to the walls, starting to meld into one another, becoming an amorphous blob unto themselves? This is one of those places where they have come to gather. And the maw, or as they think it is not a maw. All it is a well. But since the room, or this flesh substance, is taking on the shape of the room, it now looks like a Sarlacc pit, for lack of a better term. Shout out to my Star Wars nerds out there. And what we have here is a situation where if they end up going down that route, they'll end up at number 4, which, don't bother scrolling down, I'll read it out. The halls seem covered in flesh, fangs the size of swords, lidless eyes observing all that fall upon it, dripping with a foul liquid from the walls and ceiling. The hall itself seems to contract and expand. The center is a larger room with a hole surrounded with fangs that carves or craves sustenance. This is one of the reasons why I ad-lib my descriptions, but the hole here is just a well. Now, what's actually happening, unbeknownst to the party, unless they've been observing, or if they've taken their time to observe another person getting absorbed, is most of the stuff that this person had on their person is just chucked down the hole. It's a pile of useless, non-living matter. So in that case, it no longer matters to them. So there is some loot you can actually have if you want to end up going down this, but effectively it's the same as trying to go down the gullet of a purple worm.
So that you are offering the chance for players to get some loot in it, because I mean, whether we want to just go, oh, it's D&D, or maybe there could be something useful, but you're presenting them the option of, is the juice worth the squeeze? There is stuff down there. Do you want stuff? Well, well, literally, right?
Yep. However, you might also notice that I have a little bit of a broken line with a little bit of blue leading to room 5. That in room 3, there's the same scenario, just different infected, but that water is coming in from, the lake or this ocean outside. It's partially flooded because this is where the aboleth prefers to live. It wants to end up making sure there's waterways, but after the erosion and the falling of the angel creating the ancient tree, now all of a sudden, okay, we just had most of this collapse. They're trying to clean it out and allow it to be an incubation chamber. But not all the halls are filled, none of them are rubble filled. So if the parties are particularly observant, they can find out that they can actually go under the water and pop out in Area 5. Area 5 used to end up being a shrine dedicated. They can end up actually learning some information. So rather than just, here's a depiction of all its glory, here's a room where history before gods was written. The trick is you got to get through what is effectively rubble and water, in the dark, underwater, with no understanding of how long that passage is. Now, you could end up going through there, not a problem. And there's multiple routes from that room, but you can gain very important knowledge. It's here, before you end up facing, you can see the picture of an aboleth. It's where you can learn this is our foe. You might not know that's what it is, but at least it's hinted, it's foreshadowed. And it's late enough that something that blatant foreshadowing doesn't hurt the game, it helps. It's not done too early. Now, here's the tricky part. You can end up going into the water and end up swimming and actually coming out in section 8. Or there's a little path. I'm going to need to work on how to make this map, but if you see where AB, that actually leads up to the top corner. That's actually a lower level, right?
Yep, I'm following along. I'm using my mouse to try and swirl around the areas you're talking about to highlight it for anyone watching.
Not a problem. So you can actually go under the water and actually come out where that well was originally feeding water. Except now it's grown so thick with this fleshy substance, which is effectively just people being liquefied and transitioned. And now it's a room filled with this stuff, but it has this huge pile of potential treasure in there. And you can go for it, and you don't need to make a 20-foot fall, and it's reducing how long you stay in that infected point. You can go further south, and now you only got to deal with like 15 feet of this stuff, as opposed to having to deal with, what would that be now? 70, 80 feet long to get to the exit? So there is alternative routes. If something's particularly hard, always make sure that there's a secondary route. Because, ultimately a secret garnered, like a hidden passageway underwater, will always help.
Yeah, and real quick, D-Floof just showed up and donated a bit. D-Floof, thank you very much for that. I super appreciate it. And you know what? A gift of 1 bit still means a lot. You went out of your way to come here, and you went out of your way to hand over 1 of your bits. And that means a lot to me. You came in at a good time because we have a special guest, DM MacabreDerek. We're going over some spooky horror themed stuff. I mean, not to trivialize it, Derek, but like we're going through horror campaign. We're talking about and now we're through that lens. We're going through some dungeon building, and you did make a great point, Derek, that for dungeons, it's a meta consideration. But yes, if you're building a dungeon not super tailored to the exact party that you have, you should consider the fact that what if the party's a bunch of brainy spellcasters and you don't have people who can hold their breath for 5 minutes? Or because they are spellcasters, they don't even need to breathe? Or, do you have a brainy way and a brawny way? Or do you have someone who's good at secret passages and that provides a shortcut? Or can you just go the quote-unquote regular way? Those are considerations that I do believe need to be taken.
Yeah, but here's the difference, right? The waterway, that's not stable. That's loose rock. And you're going at it at half speed because you're basically swimming in the dark and trying to feel your way through it. If you don't have dark vision down there, you're swimming in darkness and hoping that there's air somewhere nearby. Right?
Yes.
And if you dislodge one of those rocks, there's an off chance that you might have that tunnel collapse on you, pinning you down, and now you're going to have to fight your way out before you drown. So it's not safer, it's just a different challenge.
Yep. And as a DM, if I can also interject, when you're using rules that don't often get to be used in D&D, like there's rules for suffocation and drowning. There's a lot of status effects that you can fall under that maybe you will hardly, if ever, see in campaigns, whether they're homebrew or modules. And so if you can crack open your DMG, or be imaginative, or look at the player's handbook and look at conditions or battle things, that can also, Derek, you talked about surprise as one of Alfred Hitchcock's ways to invoke horror. Even a seasoned D&D player, how many times are you faced with drowning in a D&D game? Maybe not that often. And so if all of a sudden now these rules, we have to blow the dust off of our rule books and be like, whoa, how does this work again? You can drown in D&D? Yes, you can. And you might.
And you might. You know, you wouldn't be the first player I drowned. All right? Along with their familiar. So, that being said, just with those few that we've filtered out, we end up having this situation where we've done multiple things, even though we haven't even gotten through the full dungeon yet. I haven't even presented a full story with this dungeon. But what I have done is room number 2 only hints. It shows a little bit of what this thing can do, right? This blob that we end up having.
Yeah,
you might have encountered it previously. You might not have. That's entirely up to the GM who's running it. But here we got the hint. But it's not until you go around the bend and realize, oh, there's a hallway of this stuff. Now just to figure out how much of this stuff you gotta contend with, you gotta find a way to peek down that hallway without going anywhere near the walls or floor or ceiling, for that matter. Right? Because those walls, ceiling, they if you're not infected, it's going to do everything it can to eat you. And once you are infected, well, as far as it's concerned, well, I'm have the job halfway finished, might as well finish it.
Yeah. And this might be a good opportunity if you want to put more faces of innocent people. You could just have them sort of like, I don't know, almost like ask for help or beg for death, or just sort of even be a face in the weird crowd, couldn't you?
You could very much do that, right? Right? The whole idea with this kind of campaign is you're trying to figure out, what did the players do? Who did they interact with? Who do I need? How do I bring it back? How do I always bring it back? What did they say? How do I make that come back to haunt them? You're constantly trying to pull and basically create this cycle of, they're giving you the rope that you can now measure to offer it back for them to hang themselves.
Yes.
Which is why it is that Plunder always talks about rope with me, because it is enough rope to hang himself. Now, I can go on with the more details in this dungeon, but I think you get the idea. Here's hidden knowledge. Knowledge is one of the biggest rewards that is underappreciated in a dungeon setting.
Yes.
But invoking this impossible imagery, invoking old carvings that you may not be able to understand because the language has been all but forgotten. You know, it's the language of primordials. It's before gods. Very few people might know it, but you know what? You see this three-eyed creature, right? You look at it and you go, what the heck is that? Especially for players who don't know what an aboleth is, because let's be honest here, there's a lot of players who have never run into an aboleth or have any understanding of what it actually is.
Yep.
You can use that.
And I do firmly believe it's underused because, you know, I think the natural tendency, and for games or players who go this way, I'm not insulting, it's, hey, do I want a book or do I want a +1 sword? And you know, which shiny object is going to be more useful. Yes, a +1 sword can be useful, but if right now in this dungeon the most difficult thing to overcome is an infected commoner, especially if you're going to slice it open with a sword, wouldn't you rather, in a horror setting where it's actually the lack of knowledge that provides so much terror and fear? You know, phobias are irrational fears. Knowledge helps bring rational thought. Knowledge is your most powerful tool in a horror setting because it helps you rationalize. It helps you combat the weird and the unknown.
And when you end up using that, you're going to want to end up building upon it further, because here's the thing, right? Whenever one question is answered, 20 need to spring up. So, and especially when you're talking about any form of Lovecraftian horror, which is what I'm trying to present, which is highly underrated in my opinion, but maybe that's because I am a horror snob. When it comes down to it, when you start discussing this, the sheer scope should be so vast that you have to kind of just think about it and go, okay, I legitimately, I understand it in theory. So a good example is actually how the human brain actually understands numbers. Can you actually visualize 10,872 of one thing? Can you conceptualize that? Chances are not. Right? We know one's good. Two, I'm taking a bit from Penn and Teller from this. Two, I understand. Two is double of one. Three is triple. Four, I can do five. Some people can do up to 9 without putting things in bunches. But once you get to 10, you might be picturing 2 groups of 5.
Yeah.
Is but you can't put it all in one random pattern, look at it, and go, I know that to be 10. Right? Now you got a handful. Right? If you go up to 20, now you got a bunch. This continues, but you're no longer conceptualizing the actual number. You are just putting in this box because you actually cannot fathom it.
Yeah, and I think that's why, you go to a doctor and they tell you, oh yeah, you have, we got to remove a cyst and it's the size of a grape or it's the size of an apple. Because they're simple things that are easier for us to imagine. And I put it in chat over here. A lot of what you're describing is something called the heap paradox. If we have salt and we just drop 1 grain of salt or sand or something similar at a time, at what point do we have a heap of salt? Because if I put 1 grain of salt in front of you, you're like, that's a grain of salt.
Yep.
If I overturn a salt shaker, you're like, yeah, that's a heap of salt. If I take away a pinch, that's still a heap. Or if we add another grain to the first, no, that's not a heap. Is 100 grains of salt a heap? No, that's 100 grains of salt. I know a heap when I see a heap. What's the number?
Hey, party gnome.
Hey, oh yeah, party gnome. Hey, welcome to the party, gnome. Actually, I'm sorry for your people.
Look. You knew what you were getting into when you ended up giving this to me, all right?
No.
Like, you knew. And you want to know what? Skindred said it best. Nobody gets out alive.
If I may ask then, sort of in conclusion, it looks like 8 might be the prison area, and they probably are going to get some information here.
Yep.
Yeah,
now
we can talk about it more, but I'd like to take a hard break for about another 10 minutes.
Yeah,
I see that definitely. You have 3 numbered areas toward the end or the exit. What is the finale of sorts for the dungeon? What is the hope or the goal?
Okay, so here's the thing. Remember, what this ultimately is something that tries to absorb more flesh. How dangerous does a conjurer suddenly get in that point?
Because it can just spawn more bodies?
Yeah. Try and imagine something so corrupted and saying, no, you want to know what? You're actually better as a lone individual than you are as a part of the mass right now. You'll earn your spot. Because you are so twisted that just being one with everything is so important. So you might only have 2 servitors if you manage to take out these 4 commoners, which is fairly poignant. But again, we ended up making that argument. You're putting down somebody who their will is no longer their own. Are you doing any favors, especially knowing that such a thing like cure disease? Try and imagine what the roleplay and the knowledge you can gain if you actually decided, you know what? I'm going to leg one of them, and so I'm going to put them into unconsciousness or what have you with a single arrow strike, and because that is an option, and I'm going to cure disease. Right? Are you capable of doing that? Are you going to babysit them the whole way? Are you really going to trust that they can make it back to the surface from, like, what would it be, like almost a full 7 days travel just straight down?
Well, and cure disease doesn't mean that they can't get the disease again. At least as far as I'm remembering this spell. Doesn't make them immune from recontracting it.
Yep. But now try and imagine what would happen if you suddenly came out, right? Try and imagine that feeling. and
Oh,
try and imagine
seeing
what.
all the horror around you? Oh, yeah. You might just go catatonic.
I hope not. That's so much less interesting.
Oh,
But
yeah.
we're going to take that 10-minute break, but I'm going to leave you on this thought, Matt. Plunder has said on several times that if you die in Derek's game, you got off light. I'm hoping you're starting to believe that now, because I'm taking a little bit of pride in that bit of reputation.
Yeah. I can see that. I can see that being the case. I've been very happy that you were willing to take up the challenge, especially on kind of a short notice. Look, you're a busy guy. You know, you have your job, anything else that's going on, your own games, and I mean that you were willing to step up and make this presentation at my request. That means a lot to me personally. Like, me speaking as me, I am so grateful that you were able to do this, and it makes me hopeful that others have been able to also be a part of this, to take away ideas, to feel encouraged, to in their own ways challenge themselves or feel fine. Yes, I specialize in this type of a game, and I'm going to be proud of it. I want someone to come up with a tagline for me, like what Plunder Loot said for you. And this is, I mean, Derek, you're patient zero itself of having this sort of guest DM program, and this is amazing. And as much as you want to share this, I won't take that away from you. When you feel that it's ready, and if you want to put it up on the Discord for everyone else in this channel to download, to contemplate, to mull over, and maybe even run themselves, I'll let you do that, because I think you have an awesome idea here. That can be taken even out of Ukt. You could put this in the jungle of Chult. You could put this in a dark sun setting, if you wanted to. I mean, especially because water is a very valuable resource. But yeah, that's
it's one of these things where, like I said, first day you met me, right? I was very brazen about it. I am a horror GM. I emotionally destroy players. If a player is at that level of bleed in my game where, and this has happened, where we got to take a half-hour break, and that half-hour break is spent consoling the player because he just put a loaded 45 into his mother's mouth and blew her brains out in front of his sister.
In-game, by the way, for any of you who are in-game.
Yes. That's what I thrive on as a GM. And players who thrive on that emotional investment and payoff, even if it's that hurt, that emotional, like, ugh, right? There are players who thrive on that because, oh my God, I am so invested that it managed to do this. It's like re-experiencing the death of Ares again, right? Final Fantasy. That moment where it's like, oh my God, no. If you can invoke that as a storyteller, as a GM, I honestly believe there's a talent that is highly underappreciated. And that's what I advocate. And I'm, like I said, proof's in the pudding. Can you do this? It's great you can talk a long campaign, but I wanted to make sure that, especially here, I made these claims. I wanted to make sure I prove this is what I do best. And there's a reason I've developed this reputation.
You've done so in spades, my friend.
All right.
So with that, I hopefully no one needs consolation, though this was very intense. Why don't we take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back and we can talk about whatever. You know, we're in part 3. Whew, we got through the horror movie. Now we can all go out and get slushies or milkshakes and and go from there.
Well, we'll go from the tips and tricks on how to pull this off.
There we go. All right, I'll be back in 10 minutes. Everyone get up, stretch, use the bathroom, do whatever you got to do, and we'll be back.